very good to have all of you here. Very good to have Bruno here with us. My name's Khurram Hussain. I'm a Pakistani journalist. I write mostly on the economy. Bruno is somebody I've known for a number of years now. I have followed his work, and I think the best way to introduce Bruno to all of you is that he is an explorer of life and the world at the same time. Bruno Maçães has, excuse me, वहाँ पीछे तो कुछ शोर आ रहा है. दो कैमरामैन जो हैं, थोड़ा सा अगर वहाँ से खामोशी हो जाए, please. Thank you. But Bruno has followed the world from the point of view of a politician, from the point of view of a technocrat, as in his former role as finance minister of Portugal. He has followed the world as an academic and as a writer, seen it through the lens of theory and academia. And he's now, for a number of years, seeing the world directly through as in his new role as a reporter as well. In a direct engagement with some of the most difficult parts of the world, whether it's Ukraine or the war in Israel. So, in a sense, I see Bruno as probably the most engaging kind of intellectual, one who is equally comfortable in the company of politicians, academics, or journalists, and who knows the world from direct engagement and experience, as well as through the lens of books. It's a pleasure to have him here today. His new book is titled World Builders. It's not out yet, which is why we don't have a copy to show you. It's due out in about 1 month, and he just informed me that this is in fact the first event connected with the book. And right after this, he's going to India and then to other locations as part of a pre-publication launch. But the book will be out soon. I've had the pleasure of being able to peruse it in the past few days. The book presents a new way of looking at global politics. And in the book, Bruno argues that there is now emerging, or has come, what we might call the rise of virtual communities. Communities that are connected to each other. And we're talking about gigantic, globe-embracing communities in some cases that are connected to each other in a virtual world that has its own language, its own nomenclature, its own technologies behind it. And the way in which these virtual communities are interacting with the material world, the real world, in which states fight each other for territory, for example, versus virtual communities in which influencer networks struggle with each other for influence and for reach. Both of these, the manner in which they interact with each other, produces what he calls the world game, in a sense. And one of the questions I'm going to be asking him is whether the idea of the world and geopolitics as a game is only a metaphor, or whether there is an actual material reality to it. But initially, I think for my first question, Bruno, and by the way, I want to encourage questions of all stripes. Okay, I want everybody here to have an opportunity to engage with Bruno. He's one of those people that doesn't believe that there is, or at least in very rare cases only, that there's such a thing as a stupid question. All questions have something or the other in them. They are coming from a place of curiosity or inquisitiveness that is worth engaging with. You'll find that out. So if you have a thought or a question in your mind, express it, especially if you are a student. I want you to engage and interact with Bruno and find out for yourself what it's like to speak to a world intellectual. But Bruno, thanks for coming. And my first question to you is, you call your book The World Builders. Who are these world builders, and what is the world that they are building?
Khurram, I was going to speak without a microphone because it seemed to be a little echo and the room is small. But then I realized that maybe the camera needs the microphone, so I'll keep with the microphone. I hope you can you can understand it. So this book, I try to develop a big theory of world politics, and the reason I thought I had to do that is, someone who every day has to have an opinion on what is happening on this corner of the world or that corner of the world. Sometimes you feel a bit fake because you're coming up with opinions constantly about new things, and you're not quite sure if they are rooted in something real, or if you're making up an opinion because someone just called and asked what do you think about what is happening in Syria. So this was an effort to develop a theory that can provide some guidance and fundamentals to look at events as they happen. So it's my most academic book. I think it will be a book for universities, for courses on world politics. And that is the attempt. Now, what is the theory? The theory is we live in such a technological era, such a technological age, that it has become possible to build artificial worlds. And power in world politics is now more about who can build a fully artificial world than about who can control the real world or the physical world. In the past, geopolitics was about who can control the physical world. And there was a lot of rivalry about controlling key places in the world, controlling the key ports, the key straits, the key mountain passes. This was the world of geopolitics 100 years ago. Now, what is the world of geopolitics today? In my opinion, it's not about controlling the key ports or the key straits. It's about controlling the gates to the virtual worlds. It's about controlling microchips, for example. Microchips have replaced the key straits, have replaced the Malacca Strait, or have replaced the Bar al-Mandab Strait, and so on and so forth. The book has a lot of a sort of a science fiction tone to it, because it talks about this world of the future, which is increasingly the world of the present, where we live inside artificial or virtual worlds. Now, if you are powerful enough to create a virtual or artificial world that other people have to inhabit, that's the highest possible form of power. It's a bit like the Matrix, the film, right? You build an artificial world and others are living inside this world. They are not even fully aware that they are captured inside a world that others have built. Now, who is building these worlds? In the book, I suggest we have a good term for the world builders. It's the superpowers. Essentially, today, we have a battle between the United States and China about who can build the world of the future. In fact, I started thinking about this new book and the idea in the book when around 2018, this is the other thing about this book, even though it took 18 months to write, which is more than I usually take, it actually comes out of about 6-8 years of thinking about these topics, rather slowly starting to think about them. And I started to think about them in 2018 when people, particularly in Washington, were using an expression that I thought was very intriguing. They were starting to say, if we are not careful, we will have to be living in a Chinese world. We are in danger of having to live in a Chinese world. And I was very struck by that, because what does it mean to live in a Chinese world? I mean, the world is the world outside with the trees, with the sunlight, mountains, beaches, world made by God for those who believe, but certainly not a Chinese world. So what is this idea of living in a Chinese world? And if Americans are concerned about living in a Chinese world, well, maybe the Chinese and others are concerned about living in an American world. If you can create a Chinese world, then you can create an American world. Maybe actually the world we live in is an American world, and Americans are concerned that the American world is going to be replaced by a Chinese world. But then, the question is, what is this? What is a Chinese world? What is an American world? Maybe the real world is not that important anymore, or doesn't really exist anymore. And the world that exists is the world that is built or made by the great powers. So the world will be Chinese or American or a mixture of both, or perhaps other superpowers will appear. And everyone else has to live inside these worlds that are built by others. This is the summary of the book, very briefly.
Okay, interesting idea. And in the book, you mention at one point that China has challenged the world because they've shown that you can master technology and get to the cutting edge of technological development and yet not embrace Western values, right? And Western values of openness and whatnot. And I think you used the word convergence. There is, in fact, no convergence in terms of the social development between the West and China on the one hand, but there is a convergence in the sense of China acquiring technological mastery. I just want to challenge that conception on one point. I'll argue that there is, in fact, a very important convergence that has taken place between China and the West. And you write, there is no convergence in the form of a demand for representative government, a demand for liberties, a demand for civil rights. These things have not come with China's acquisition of technological mastery. But China has converged with the West in the sense that they have created a consumer society. And as consumers, young Chinese people today, for example, do live in the same world as young Americans do because they both know what an iPhone is, for example. They both live in a world where memes matter, where short video clips are an important way of communicating with each other. In fact, a young Chinese person, let's say 30 years old, urban professional living in Beijing, probably has more in common with his or her counterpart in New York than their grandparents or their parents did. You know, Chinese people of the 1950s or the 1960s. What do you make of this convergence in terms of, you know, of both being consumer societies?
Yes, it's a very important question. Well, in all my books, going back to the first in 2018, I've been very interested in the difference between modernity and the West, because I think people tend to identify the two, and I don't. So to be modern is not the same thing as to be Western for me. They are two entirely separate concepts. You can be modern and non-Western. And to become modern or to modernize is not to become Western. So I would say the Chinese have modernized, but they have modernized along their own path. There is for me something like a Chinese modernity, an American modernity, and a European modernity. There will soon be an Indian modernity. There is already kind of a Turkish modernity, although it is connected in many ways with European modernity. So that's how I think about it. And I don't see a convergence of any kind, really. There's been a break in human history. Modernity is essentially about technology, is essentially about controlling nature. But that can be done in many different ways, and can be done according to many different concepts, according to many different cultures, according to many different ultimate goals. I don't see a cultural convergence, for example. In fact, I see a very strong cultural divergence. This is something I've been arguing a lot, in fact, mostly on social media, where I get in a lot of trouble when I argue that the world is becoming less American. I mean, and you tell me about Pakistan, but it's my impression, traveling in many parts of the world, that the world is becoming a lot less American. Just came back from 2-3 weeks in Japan, and that's what I saw. Comparing to the first few times when I started to go to Japan 30 years ago, because now I'm getting old enough. You are as well, Khurram. Getting old enough that I can speak about the distant past. And you know, 35 years ago, going to Japan, you saw a profoundly Americanized culture. By the way, the movie Lost in Translation, which I rewatched the other day, it's still kind of this Japan that looks like America. Now I see many young Americans that go to Japan. They are fascinated. I saw one the other day, one blogger, American blogger, saying Tokyo is the greatest city in the world. And then you read those things carefully, and they are fascinated because now Japan is such a different world. There's been a break. There's been, in fact, a divergence. I don't see young Chinese converging with America. Now, on social media, when I get into these debates, and usually my posts on social media about this, as opposed to my posts on Gaza, my posts on Gaza get 5,000 views. My posts on this topic get the other one the other day got 15 million views. The Americans get very angry when you suggest that the world is no longer American. And the response I get is, there are McDonald's everywhere, Bruno. But, well, you know, McDonald's is not culture, right? You can't say American culture. You know, if you say American culture is everywhere because McDonald's is everywhere, then you have to say that Chinese culture is everywhere because shoes and tennis are Chinese. And, you know, these jeans were probably made in China. So, but, you know, I wouldn't call these jeans Chinese culture because they were made in China. And McDonald's is essentially a commodity. You wouldn't say that Saudi culture is present in Pakistan because the oil you consume in the petrol stations is Saudi. That's just a commodity. It's a physical commodity. And a McDonald's is a physical commodity. Now, burgers and diners and rock and roll and Marilyn Monroe, it formed a cultural constellation 70 years ago. That was culture, and perhaps burgers and diners and Coca-Cola had a place there. But that's long gone. You know, I don't see anyone in the world that is now dreaming about rock and roll and so on. They're dreaming about K-pop. By the way, in Japan, after sort of being struck by the differences, I went and did some research, and it turns out that, for example, music consumption in Japan now, it's about 85% Japanese pop music, 14% Korean pop music, and 1% Western pop music. 1% of record sales and downloads and streaming. So it's quite remarkable. So, Khurram, in brief, I think the whole world is becoming modern, but in fact, the whole world is becoming a lot less Western. And we're having this different kinds of modernity that are living together, and that describes our world better than any other picture. But I'm curious about how you see this in Pakistan, especially younger people. If you're you know, you can't compare to the past, but I would predict that perhaps younger people are less fascinated and less attracted by American culture than younger people in Pakistan 40, 50 years ago. But interesting.
I would agree with that. I would agree as well that there's, compared to what it was like when I was growing up, there's far less fascination and much more interest in valorizing other traditions, other cultures. But moving on, you introduce a new language as a result of talking about virtual communities, and you talk about, for example, the system administrator. A big power has the same, or a superpower in today's world would wield the same kind of powers that a system administrator would in a game. Or imagine a massive multiplayer game where one system administrator has the power to see all of the players' moves, whereas the players only see what they see. They can't see the game as a whole. And the system administrator would have the power to tweak the rules periodically, interject themselves into the middle of the game and change the rules. You also talk about virtual communities. Now, in the past, we talked about hegemonic powers. We talked about imagined communities. And nationalism was an imagined community in a sense. What I want to know is, how is your language an advance on the older language? Why talk about system administrators? Like, what does that add to our understanding that the word hegemonic powers didn't?
So I started to think about the world as a video game a long time ago, many years ago. And then slowly it seemed to work as a way to interpret events in world politics. And let me give you an example. When Russia invaded Ukraine, just a few days after that, 3 or 4 days after that, the European Union and the United States froze the Russian central bank reserves. You remember this. They were frozen. They were no longer accessible by Russia. In the future, it's being discussed now, they may be transferred to Ukraine, or they could be canceled. But so far, they've only been frozen. Now, let's think a little bit about that. First, For those who are not economists or finance people, let me explain a little bit of what happened without getting into technicalities. So the Russian central bank has foreign currency reserves, but it's not in cash, or 99.9% of it is not in cash. It's just an entry in a computer in Frankfurt, the European Central Bank, or in the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. So it's very easy for the European Union or for the United States to freeze the reserves. You just go into your computer there and say, no longer accessible. And Russia suddenly cannot move it, cannot use it, cannot sell them anymore. It has $300 billion in Frankfurt and in New York, but it can't do anything about it. Now, if we were still in the world of gold and cash or physical assets, this wouldn't be doable unless the physical assets were in New York. But if they were somewhere else, Russia would still have access to them. And a little part of it was in cash, but very little. Now, how do we think about what happened here? And in fact, it's exactly as you described. You're kind of playing a video game, many people, and there's someone who has access to the control panel of the world game, or of the video game. I call it a world game in my book. So if you have access to the control panel, you can change the settings. Let's say we're playing a game, and in the game I have a machine gun, and you don't have a machine gun, but there's someone with access to the control panel of the game, and at one point they decide, well, Bruno no longer has a machine gun, and Khurram has a machine gun. And you just change the settings, go there to the control panel of the game and change it. Now, isn't this exactly what happened with the central bank reserves? It's just like there's a game that everyone is playing. It just so happens that some countries have access to the control panel and others don't have access to the control panel. And this is the highest form of geopolitical power. Why do they have access to the control panel? Well, because they built the game, and they built it with that capability of accessing the control panel. And once you start thinking in these terms, then I think, well, let's hope so, you read the book or you started reading it, it starts to illuminate more or less everything. You talk about energy, you talk about the role of the dollar, you talk about sanctions and so on in these terms. It is a different world where it seems to me there are two levels of power. There are those who are playing the game, and there are those who are building the game or programming the game. And the highest form of power is the power to build and program the game and keep access to the control panel of the game. But right now, that's mostly a power that is in the hands of America, with China starting to access some parts of the control panel and trying to take over the game, so to speak.
Okay, let's move on and let's talk about energy, the role of the dollar, and global politics. And let's have short answers here. Let's have a rapid fire series of questions. No, that's fine. No. Yeah, but let's accelerate the pace of the conversation. Do formulate your thoughts or your questions and keep them ready. I'm about to come to you guys, so just feel free to put up your hand and register your presence with me. But in the meantime, let me ask you this. China is emerging as a competitor, a challenger, a rival to American preeminence in the world or the global system. In the past, modern history tells us that no great power has ever surrendered before a challenger without first putting up a fight. Is a war between America and China emerging?
So this is the big question. How do you become the world's greatest power, replacing a previous power without war? And if this is China's ambition, are we inevitably heading towards war? And war in this case is not like the wars of the 18th century, it's war with nuclear weapons. One possibility is that war has become impossible because of nuclear weapons, or global wars of supremacy have become impossible between nuclear powers. And therefore, war is no longer a way to replace the power at the top, because in the past it's been war that has been used to replace the leading power. And so you could say American power will last forever. War is impossible. There is no other way to replace the leading power. Therefore, the leading power will stay in that position forever. This is one theory, which may well be true. The other possibility is that there will, in fact, be a war, and perhaps with nuclear weapons. The third theory is that maybe there is a way to replace the leading power without war. And that's kind of the theory in my book. That if you build a game, or you build a system, or you build an artificial world on top of the American world, it's possible for that world that you're building to absorb the American world and become, in fact, the global system. And then you'll have access to the control panel, only it will be a Chinese world, not an American world. And the way I see it, 10 seconds, Khurram, the way I see it, this is China's plan. And in fact, you see a lot of discipline in China in terms of focusing on technological development, focusing on the dollar and the RMB, focusing on building a system to replace the American system, because I think China realizes that is the way you can become the world's hegemon and can replace the existing hegemon. Just to conclude, I think we actually have an example of where one power was defeated without war, and that's, of course, the Cold War. So the Soviet Union collapsed without using nuclear weapons, simply because the US was able to build a global system and to defeat the Soviet Union in that way, not through war.
Bruno, yes or no? Young people here, in their lifetime, do you think there's a rising likelihood that they will live to see great power conflict happen one more time, like in the first half of the 20th century, and only this time between America and China?
No, you know, I continue to believe that this is a big theory in international relations that I think is probably correct. There are many theories in international relations that are not correct. That war between nuclear powers is, in the final analysis, not possible. Okay. So I can't expect a war between China and the United States. I think China itself understands that it will absorb Taiwan in some other way, not through a direct clash with the United States. And that's simply because of nuclear weapons.
Okay, so you don't foresee China trying to do in Taiwan what Russia did in Ukraine,
no,
forcibly absorb the territory and take
well,
it back?
force, you know, I don't foresee a large-scale invasion. We have to discuss what it means to force the absorption. There may be other ways to do it, but not a large-scale invasion.
I've got a ton of questions for you, but I think so do members of the audience. I'm going to now hand over the initiative to all of you. We'll start with the gentleman up here. I would like to see more female hands up as well, please. Okay, so right now a lot of men are raising their hands, which is fine. We'll come to you, but I would like to see more female hands up as well. Sir.
Thank you very much.
Can you introduce yourself first?
My name is Ismail Qureshi and I am ex-civil servant. Just as narrow identities like tribes...
Sir.
Can you hear me? No, okay.
Now, just hold it closer to your mouth.
Is it better now? Okay. Just as narrow identities like tribes and kingdoms have been dissolved, diminished, how much of the challenges you're talking about, like especially by the technology, is going to be hitting the state-centric cooperative frameworks? Because technology, as you see, is what is driving everything, and you're talking two superpowers. To what extent the technology ultimately will have the effect on the global framework or the cooperative framework, whether even nation states are going to be dissolved?
Well, if your question is about whether, for example, big technology companies will replace states, you know, your question could mean many different things. But if it means this, I disagree. I don't see any sign of that happening. I see, on the contrary, states becoming more sovereign, concentrating power. The story of Trump right now, what is happening, I think you're seeing all the big technology companies becoming rather subservient to Trump. We just saw Mark Zuckerberg make a little public speech where essentially he's surrendering to Trump. So political power continues to be dominant. It does seem to be the case, and that's a separate discussion, it does seem to be the case that the nation states are being replaced by larger units. that in some of my writings I call civilization states. So China, the United States, the European Union, India, these are perhaps countries that don't quite deserve the name of nation states. They represent something more than a nation. They are larger than a nation. In some cases, they include nations within themselves. They seem to represent more a certain vision of the future. The United States, India, China, European Union, I don't think they represent nations. They represent a certain vision of what is good against alternative visions. And this is the world we're entering, of these large units with projects for the future and with certain understandings of the good life, rather than nation states, which I would think probably belong more to the 19th and the 20th century.
Okay, we have another question right here.
Hi, my name is Raza. I'm a lawyer. My question is based on like what you just said, because that's directly in conflict with what Ian Bremmer proposes, that there'll be a third technological power in the world. But my question is, as a Pakistani, we see that in the last 1 year especially, the political moment in the world seems to be of the global south, where the world realizes, a very big, large part of the world realizes that the current rules-based order does not work for a majority of the world. And the push that we've seen with like the ICJ case against genocide and Israeli occupation has been led by not the opposing bloc of America, i.e. China, but by these middle powers, so-called Brazil, South Africa. So like in your understanding or analysis of the future, where do you see these middle powers, especially Brazil, Turkey, India, which is a rising power? And because like even in the future of energy, lithium is a very important factor. We have seen cobalt-driven civil war in Africa. So like, how does these real-world factors affect this future vision of the world, according to you?
Yes, I completely agree with you. There's a sense in which the American-led order is becoming less and less representative of the world as a whole. Maybe later we'll talk about Gaza. I'm not going to go into that, but I do think Gaza reflects, to put it very briefly, reflects America's inability to represent anything like a global vision. Votes in the UN about Israel, usually those supporting Israel is the United States and 3 or 4 Pacific islands. And you look at that and, some people don't think it's significant. I do think it's significant because, if this is the world's leader and it doesn't represent anyone anymore on such a decisive question, that's important. Now, you could maybe think of the world as becoming more democratic, but what it means in practice, I think, is that some of these middle powers have the ability to choose on different occasions and different times who they want to side with. They can build coalitions, or in some cases they can support the Chinese project. In other cases, they may still support the Western American-led project. So it is more of a question of who do you vote for, voting in quotes. Basically, right now you have 2 main projects, I would say, but we can talk about the European Union and India and Japan, and they also have a voice in some areas, but 2 main projects about how the world should be ruled and how it should be organized: the American project and the Chinese project. And middle powers have a great role because in the end, the question of which project will win depends more than anything else on what part of the world and how large a part of the world sides with one project or the other. And that's a question that is still very open. But obviously we are in a very decisive moment because it does seem, it's still too early, but it does seem that the United States is increasingly unable to speak to the world as a whole. Mm-hmm. And let me give you 10 seconds just. I think without talking about China and India and all those things are a bit controversial, but let me just give you the example of Africa. Uh, 70, 80 years after decolonization, there still is no space in the world economy for Africa. And now for 30, 40 years, it was still possible to say, well, it will eventually happen. Africa also needs to put its act together, but it's happening, and so on. But now I think there's a growing realization in Africa that it's not going to happen, that only with a new economic order that could happen. And this is also a crisis of legitimacy for the current order, a very significant crisis of legitimacy. Larger and larger parts of the world are being left out, and there's a crisis of legitimacy here.
Okay, you have a question
Quickly,
up here
yeah.
and then back there.
So after Second World War, there was a rivalry two powers. It's Russia and America.
I'm sorry,
and,
you
and,
need- you
and
need to
down the
introduce
line,
yourself.
yeah, sorry.
अपना नाम बता देना.
So my name is Yusuf Jamshed. I'm a sorry, I am a fintech specialist. So my point is this: is China, America confused who are their rivals? That's why the world is less Americanized. And all these blocs, China and Russia stand together. And in last 10 years, we see the BRICS model coming in. And in last 1 year, they have put a lot of pressure on the economy. And 2 days back, Iran and Russia had decided they will trade in their own currencies. So coming to all this, what you say, world power, before that it was two people. Now all Hollywood movies are rivalry with China. They have left Russia saying bad again, and they have gone to that. Would these two powers be overcoming a US, and they will be down the line, or they have the substance still left to fight with them?
Look, the way I think about this is to rule the world is in the end not that different from ruling a country. And to rule a country or to rule the world, you need, first of all, a certain discipline. I mean, if you're ruling a country and if you want to be successful at it and if you want to last, you can't be enjoying yourself. There's a certain discipline involved in the act of governing. And if you lose yourself in pure enjoyment, even enjoyment of your power, then even as a dictator, you might not last. So for American power to last, there would have to be a certain discipline of sometimes sacrificing your own interests for the sake of your power, sacrificing your immediate interests for the sake of your power. And the United States, for a long time after World War II, was able to do this in a rather remarkable way, for example. The United States was able to accommodate and integrate Japan into the world economy after 1945, was able in many cases to sacrifice its immediate interests for the sake of recovery in Japan and in Europe. I just don't see that discipline anymore. And even, for example, in the Middle East, the United States was always on the side of Israel. But there was a sense that if you want to be the world's greatest power, you have at least to pretend to be balanced. And for many decades, there was an attempt to pretend. And some American officials in the past, I think, were even doing more than pretending. They had a genuine interest in stability. They had a general interest in order. So I think the best example is James Baker, who I think had a genuine interest in bringing about an understanding between Palestinians and Israelis. Even Rashid Khalidi, the famous Palestinian writer and professor, has some nice words to say about James Baker, that he understood the Palestinian cause. Now, he was clearly much closer to Israel, but at least he understood the Palestinian cause. Now, if you look at Gaza in the past year and a half, what you see is that the United States is not behaving like the world's leader. The world's leader has to be concerned about everything else with order, with stability, and with some sense of impartiality. That's what a leader is. But the United States is, in fact, an agent of chaos. It's clearly increased instability and chaos in the Middle East. By supporting Israel unconditionally, the United States has encouraged Israel to behave in a complete extreme and reckless way. So you could make the case, which I think people all over the world are making, that you have an hegemon that is no longer behaving like an hegemon. You have an hegemon that is behaving like a revolutionary, creating chaos and disorder everywhere. So in my reading, this is not a good sign for the future of American power. And it's another symptom that something is changing rather fundamentally and systemically in the world.
Okay, thank you. We have a question back there. Can you stand up so we can see you and just introduce yourself and then go ahead and ask your question or share your thought, whatever it is.
Sir, I am Aruna Tahreem and I am student of Bachelor's of English Literature. And I have the question about what you were talking about a while back, that you do not see a major warfare coming between America and China. So my question is that if not a traditional warfare, is there any chance of non-traditional warfare, something like Corona? Or if you think that there will be no warfare, then a multipolar system is not stable. We cannot see that India, China, and America will remain in power together. So what do you think about that? And the third question is the question of Pakistan is even relevant in this scenario? Can we talk about Pakistan in a sense that he will play a role or he will pick a side in this scenario?
Okay, thank you. May I request you take the third question first?
Look, there's a lot to be said about Pakistan. I'll just talk about how we would fit with some of the things that I've been talking about. Pakistan has become quite important in these discussions in the last 10 years because it was placed in a position where it seemed to represent a country that was until recently part and an important part of the American-led order, a main ally in the region during the Cold War, certainly a very decisive actor in defeat of the Soviet Union, particularly the war in Afghanistan, very close to the American intelligence community, the two intelligence communities working together. And then in the last decade, kind of something happened. A gulf was created, and China, which was already an important security partner, but China became an economic and political partner of Pakistan. And so what I was just talking about a little earlier, that we have a world where many of these middle powers are being asked to choose one project or another project. And Pakistan became, in my books, for example, I discuss Pakistan a lot because it became a country that was representing this moment, whether it would embrace China's Belt and Road or whether it would still embrace Americans' global project. And in the end, I think it's not entirely about Pakistan. It is about China and the US. Can China offer Pakistan something that is sufficiently attractive? Can China reduce the distrust that I know from my travels here still exists in many parts of the establishment? Can the United States actually go back to what it used to be in the post-war decades, where it could actually offer countries like Pakistan a path towards prosperity and progress? Because I think the current moment is a moment where, you tell me if I'm wrong, but many people in Pakistan here, particularly in the elites, look to the United States and they no longer see any promise of that. That if you continue to align with the United States, yes, you'll be working on some counterterrorism projects, but is there a project of prosperity as being part of an American order? It doesn't seem that there is. But China is a little bit too early, and also doesn't, you don't have the trust that is necessary for Pakistan to embrace China's projects. And so we were in that transition moment. And I think Pakistan, there were two other questions, but I think Khurram thought this was more important because you want me to talk about Pakistan a little bit. So I think Pakistan is very important because it kind of represents the moment the world is in, of looking to the past, looking to the future, and seeing, and having to continue. So this discussion about where the future is heading is a very live discussion in Pakistan, as opposed to actually many other countries where people either assume that the world is going to be American forever, or they're not interested in that question. But I think Pakistan, for reasons that are contingent and historical, is actually like in the middle of the question.
Okay. Are you satisfied or? Okay.
I'll come back to your first question about other forms of conflict. I'm sure there will be opportunity to come back to that.
Permission to move on or? Okay. You had a question up front over here, and then the mic is going to the gentleman over there in the front.
I am Ejaz, a mechanical engineer from Nast University. I've just finished a book, War in the Making, by Brigadier Ghazanfar Latif. It's a great book. It says that in 2028, China will take over America as world economic power. Additionally, there are SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 7 is clean and cheap energy. 20 years back, when America produced solar panels, the price was $3.5 per watt. Last year, when Chinese mass produced, the price has gone down rock bottom. It was 40 cent per watt, $3.5 per watt to 40 cent per watt. Today, it is 9 cent per watt. While Pakistan is struggling with the energy, in our energy mix, renewable share is just 5%. China is leading the world with 50% renewables, wind, solar, EV charging, clean and cheap energy. So what is the harm in living China's world?
Yes, this is very important for me. It's very important in my book. There's a whole chapter on energy as the source of geopolitical power. Let me give you my theory in 1 minute about how the world works. So in just 1 minute. Why did Britain become the world's greatest power in the 18th century? There are many theories about this. Some people think it's because it defeated France in the 7-Year War. I think actually Britain became the world's leading power because it mastered the first energy revolution. Coal and the steam engine, and the two things working together, created a new economic global system, and Britain was the country that built it. Britain was the world builder of that world. Why did the United States in the early 20th century, late 19th century, replace Britain as the world leading power? Some people think it was war. Again, I think it's because the United States created the second energy revolution. The second energy revolution it wasn't about so much about oil. Oil was a little part of it. It was mostly about electricity. But electricity was more, oil was used to produce electricity, and coal couldn't quite do it, but electricity was the important thing. Electricity then allowed for the creation of the assembly line in the modern factory. Without electricity, there could be no modern factory, no modern industry. The United States mastered this. And so I think China understands, and my visits to China, this is confirmed by officials there. China understands that if it wants to replace the United States, it's not going to be through war, to go back to that question. It's going to be by creating a new economic energy system, and that's essentially about green energy. By the way, solar energy has great advantages over fossil fuels, not just environmental advantages. Solar energy has a great advantage that is essentially free. After you assemble a solar panel, you can produce energy for free. It has no inputs, it has no waste, it's zero marginal cost. It's like the internet. You pay to have the internet, but then you can be using the internet all day and all night, and you pay the same, right? You have an access fee. And energy in the future will be like this. You'll have an access fee to have access to the grid, but then you can use whatever energy you want, and it's all going to be free, because solar is essentially free to produce. It has no inputs. Now, the sunlight shines for free. You don't have to go after it. It is zero marginal cost. Now, this is very important because you're going to need massive amounts of energy for AI. And therefore, I think of the economic system of the future as being a combination of AI and green energy, just as the American-led economy was a combination of electricity and the modern factory, and just as the British system was a combination of coal and the steam engine. So I think you're absolutely right that if we want to think about whether and how China will replace the US, energy is central to that.
Okay, thanks. We had a question up here, and then the mic is going in that direction.
Hi, hello, assalamu alaikum. So my question you mentioned in your
Introduce yourself.
my name is Abdul Wali. I'm an undergraduate student. In your speech you mentioned the relation of modernity and Westernization. I would like for you to please elaborate on how you see it in the Pakistani context. Because the people around me, my friends and all, whoever gets the opportunity, they want to go to America and they want to do their bachelor's from there, and they plan on settling down over there as well. And then I see them also. The shows that they see on Netflix or the music that they listen to, it's mostly from America. So I would like for you to please elaborate on that point.
Right. So you're disagreeing a little bit with what I said earlier that that American culture is less important. That is true. But on the other hand, and you tell me how to fit these different pieces. On the other hand, there is an enormous fascination with Dubai and the UAE, which is a completely different kind of modernity. And by the way, a completely different kind of political system, of economic system, of culture, right? I mean, people sometimes say Dubai is Americanized. I don't even know what this is supposed to mean, because there's nothing in common between Dubai and an American city. Now, some people make the mistake that if you have skyscrapers, this is an American city. But no, this is modernity. A skyscraper is modernity. And everything that has to do with culture and life and with daily life is completely different in Dubai and the United States. It's like exact opposites in terms of, you never see a homeless person in Dubai. You'll never see a protest. The streets are clean. And an American city is the exact opposite of Dubai, obviously for good and for bad. But you can't compare. And there's obviously also a growing interest and fascination in Pakistan with China. I think as more and more people go and work there and see what a Chinese city is like, there's also an attraction. So, I mean, you will know better than I do, but before you ask your question, I would think that in Pakistan today, you actually have a sort of, all these different modernities are competing for attention and attraction and allegiance. And that perhaps Pakistani youth are a little bit divided. Now, I think that many people still have an image of America that does not correspond to reality. Look, I don't know how many of you have been recently to San Francisco and Los Angeles, but it's not the San Francisco of the movies. You go into San Francisco and, I'll tell you very bluntly, you have to be careful not to step on human excrement on the street because it's full of it. There are tent cities of homeless people that live there forever, for years. And of course, in the United States, as opposed to other places, no McDonald's or no Starbucks will allow the homeless to use the restrooms. So they use the streets. The homeless in America are not like the homeless in many other countries. They are not just economically destitute. Many of them have profound physical and mental ailments and diseases. So you may well be walking on the street and someone who should be hospitalized will attack you. This is what I see in my travels, and so sometimes I wonder, there's a lot of fascination with American cities and with American life because many people don't know what the actual reality is. But I had a little inkling in this because in 2021, I went to Kabul just before to do journalism before the Taliban arrived. I left on the last day that the airport was functioning. And then, because I was there, I helped many Afghans, that, by the way, were abandoned by the Americans. I helped them get refugee status in Portugal. And then at some point, I had discussions with them about where they should settle down. And I realized that many of these Afghans, this is how they thought, and this is interesting, so I'll just go on for 1 minute. This is how they thought. Some of them prefer to go to America, but then as we continue to talk, they wanted to go to America because they could make money in America. But so if I ask them, hypothetically, if you had $1 million, would you still go to America? And they said, no. If I had $1 million, I would go to Dubai or Istanbul. This is where I want to live. But I just don't think that in Dubai, I'll be able to make $1 million. And in America, I will. I'm not sure they will, by the way. It's not the American of 1960. And many actually prefer to go to Germany, and others were quite happy to stay in Portugal. some of them already had a certain intuition that in America crime is a serious problem for their children as well. They'll never be able to give their children a good education. So I hope I'm not sounding too anti-American, but the thing is, it's the reality of what is there. And I don't know how young people in Pakistan, particularly those who have not visited, if they're fully aware that this is the reality we're talking about.
Okay, thanks for that answer. I'll just say I think Dubai is the perfect example of a virtual city, in a sense, of an artificial world that sucks you in. It's a microcosm, it's a small one. It's not exactly on a world scale like China or the United States may be trying to do, but nevertheless on a smaller microcosmic scale. We have very little time left. A lot of hands are up. The mic is, could you introduce yourself first, please, and then ask your question.
Hello, sir. My name is Asma Kazi. My question is, with the emergence of new powers like China and like we can say India maybe, is there any potential threat in the region with the emergence of these powers? Like, do we have Pakistan or India or China have potential threats from each other, like the invasions or the imbalance of power or some other kind of like threats? Do you see any potential threat with the emergence of new powers in the region? Like in the South Asia, if India is becoming a superpower, or if China is becoming a superpower, is there any threat of it?
I discussed this in the book at the beginning. What should other countries do in this new world order? And I think there are different possibilities. So a country could, for example, think in these terms. The world is in the middle of great change. We could have different kinds of global economic and political systems. We have to become very flexible and adaptable so that we can function no matter what the world order is like. And I think a country like Singapore or Switzerland, they have become so flexible that they can be successful under any system. And in fact, a country like Singapore and Switzerland, what is remarkable is that they can be more successful than the United States, playing by the rules that the United States set. But this can happen. Sometimes you can be more successful than someone who invented the game when playing the game. Other countries, they may try to actually shape the global rules. They might not be able to shape the global system as a whole, but they can shape some small parts. It's not impossible that Pakistan, together with China, could have a decisive impact on energy in the future with solar panels. The rest of the world doesn't seem interested in Chinese solar panels. If Pakistan is, you could create a whole new... By the way, you always have problems with fossil fuels in the past and access to energy, so Pakistan would actually have an incentive to jump to a new system. That's, I think, something that should be considered, and I'm sure it is being considered. Other countries can just try to help one of the superpowers succeed. They join one, and the United Kingdom clearly just wants to help America succeed. So there are different strategies that different countries. There's a lot of space for different strategies. So this is just a way to say that the premium now is on serious thinking from political and economic elites and picking the right strategy.
Okay, and I think in short, he's saying nothing is inevitable. And there are successful strategies.
Right.
And what some diplomats have actually, in my conversations with diplomats who are watching India and China very carefully, they're saying the likelihood of India suddenly switching sides and telling the Americans, well, we're now running with the Chinese, is actually quite high. And they're taking that likelihood quite seriously in their foreign policy establishments, that India is an unreliable ally to run with in the competition.
Sometimes things change very quickly. I mean, imagine a Chinese president after Xi Jinping that is a very charming guy who is good at public speaking, dealing with the camera, who happens to actually speak English and be comfortable speaking English. Kind of overnight, China's image would change. These are very small things that could change very quickly. We shouldn't get fixated on them. Right. The structural forces are more important.
But at the moment, it's difficult to imagine a post-Xi Jinping China, isn't it?
Not that difficult, actually. It's coming, and of course, fundamentally, China will remain the same. But we shouldn't get fixated on things like, yes, Xi Jinping doesn't have the charming personality that can conquer the world, but that could change very quickly in the future with a different kind of president. Okay. That's what I'm saying.
I'm afraid we have to now close off the questioning because we are approaching the end of our time. But introduce yourself first. I know you, but everybody else doesn't, and Bruno doesn't. So.
Hi, Bruno. My name is Daniel. I work in venture capital. So I just wanted to go back to how you started off the talk with chips and AI. So you've talked a lot about the US, you've talked a lot about China. I just wanted to ask, where does Europe fit into all of this? Because you have a lot of universities over there, you have very high GDP per capita, and you worked for the Portuguese government. But it's almost as if Europe has just given up. We won't make semiconductors, we won't make AI, we will just be a holiday destination.
Yes. So look, if I had written this book 10 years ago, maybe I would have talked about 3 world builders, and I would have included the European Union. I think we kind of lost that status. The European Union continues to have a lot of power to build the world in 1 or 2 areas, particularly on trade. Continues to be a major trade power. The problem is that Europe is not united, right? On trade it is. You know that on trade, national countries have no competence. They don't make any decisions. I was also Minister of Trade, and everyone was very happy to let me have that portfolio because it means nothing. It's the European Union that makes those decisions on trade. And because trade is concentrated in the European Union has a lot of power. So to be very brief, because we don't have time, someone already had a paper there saying it's over. To be very brief, if the European Union can get its act together, if we can actually have more power in Brussels and less power in the national capitals, maybe it's still possible that the European Union will be one of the 3 main players. If people here think that India can also have that ability, then maybe we'll have 4 different players. To go back to the beginning, don't interpret my words as saying that we're all going to have China and the US forever. The game is quite open. It's just whether countries are able to rise to that status or not. And depends on them to some extent.
Thank you, Bruno. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time. I do encourage all of you to keep an eye out for the book. It is a very interesting, very innovative, and a very new way of looking at global politics. There are gigantic questions hanging over the world right now. Will there be great power conflict? Will the dollar be eroded as the global currency? Will the renewable energy revolution remake urban environments in fundamental ways, the same way that the rise of electricity and national grids did? What will happen to Europe in a world that Donald Trump is going to make? Will he withdraw the security umbrella over them? There are huge questions hanging over the world economy. Bruno's book explores these with a very sharp and a very innovative and a very new perspective.
You have to ask your professors to include the book in the course programs. This is the important thing.
So thank you for the book.